Eccoci in diretta. Buonasera a tutte e a tutti e benvenuti e benvenute alla preview online dell'edizione 2023 degli IVIPRO Days, che vi ricordo si terrà la settimana prossima a Trieste, il 27 e 28 ottobre, ma questa sera appunto c'è un'anteprima online che ricorda un po' le vecchie edizioni, una sorta di piccolo assaggio di quello che ci aspetta, anche perché questa sera abbiamo con noi degli ospiti che non hanno parlato di territorio italiano, ma di fatto hanno parlato di cultura, di patrimonio letterario italiano, perché tra poco li introdurrò e passerò anche all'inglese. Hanno realizzato nel 2021 Genesis Noir, che è un gioco ispirato anche a Italo Calvino. Quest'anno ricorre il centenario appunto della nascita di Italo Calvino, per cui ci è sembrato adatto anche rispetto all'evento agli IVIPRO Days dare spazio a questa lecture. Vi ricordo che appunto l'evento inizia il 27 ottobre e appunto per 2 giorni, 27 e 28. Ci sono ancora dei posti disponibili, vi lascio anche qui il link qualora vogliate vedere il programma o iscrivervi all'evento, perché appunto è gratuita, l'ingresso è gratuito, però appunto c'è la registrazione da fare online. Che dire, io passerei subito la parola ai nostri ospiti. Prima di tutto però ringrazio anche il Trieste Science Fiction Festival, che anche quest'anno ci ospiterà a Trieste, ed è grazie a loro che gli IVIPRO Days sono possibili anche quest'anno, per cui ci tengo a ringraziarli in anticipo, poi avrò modo di ringraziarli anche di persona quando saremo a Trieste. Quindi adesso passo dall'italiano all'inglese, so I'm switching to English so that Evan and Jeremy can understand me, because I don't know if you speak Italian, but I don't think you speak Italian. So maybe
No.
it's better to speak English. Just to introduce you very quick. First of all, thank you for accepting our invitation and for being here with us tonight. I'm a huge fan of Genesis Noir. That's why I decided to invite you, because I really loved the game when it was published. I played it soon after the publishing. Thank you for being here with us. And in your lecture, you are going to share your experience with the game and your sources of inspiration, not only Italo Calvino, but also William Blake, Sun Ra, and many others. So, to be honest, I really can't wait to listen to your lecture. So I give the floor to you, so you can introduce yourself and start your lecture about the game.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks. Well, thanks so much for the invitation. We're really excited to share our work and talk about our journey on making this game and how we learned so much by getting inspired by so many amazing artists.
We should probably introduce ourselves first.
True, yeah.
Yeah. I'm Jeremy. I'm the technical director.
Yeah, and I'm Evan, creative lead. So
I give you the floor. I'm going to remove myself from the screen, but I'm going to be here. So if you need anything, just call my name and I'm going to appear on the screen. So
yep. So yeah, we're calling this lecture Unseen Collaborators, and we're going to talk about how the work of great artists taught and directed the creation of Genesis Noir. So in particular, we're going to talk about Italo Calvino, Sun Ra, and William Blake. But before that, we're going to share our backgrounds, what making Genesis Noir was like, and then we'll get into the specifics of how those artists influenced and inspired the game. And lastly, we'll try to bring it all together and talk about how culture and heritage and game making can be related, and the great ways that game making could interact and acknowledge other art forms as well.
So our background is that we both graduated from the New Media Design program at the Rochester Institute of Technology in, I think, 2010. And Evan and I had already done a few projects there together. I think this is from what, a weird play that we did?
Yeah. I made an assignment where my classmates wrote like a brief for me to do, and I was expecting them to make me create a website or something, and then they made me put on a play. So great Luckily, Jeremy was there to perform in my silly play.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I was a giant transparent amoeba for some reason.
Yep.
I forget why that was. But actually, Evan kind of moved on to making, or all of us. Evan had more of an animation focus. This is two of his works right here. He studied motion graphics and more animation, and I studied more programming and interactive installation. This was a big mural made out of arcade buttons that lit up that I did for the lobby of Google in New York City. And we also had done some random little side projects together. This was a Yule log animation that we had worked on, made out of these neat little fabrics. And I think this was for Dan Savage's Yule log thing in like 2013 or something. And we had even decided to make a little game experience together, a little pixel art game about our friends. We made it as a gift for Christmas one year. Evan had made some custom packaging for it, and we managed to cram it into a floppy disk to kind of show the heritage of this old art form that we're mimicking here in terms of style. And you had kind of started thinking about, oh, it'd be really fun if we had a warehouse or a barn or something where you could just take all of our friends together and just make random stuff in the middle of nowhere. And one of our friends started calling this idea the Feral Cat Den. And that's, I think, where the name came from. And eventually we managed to get a studio space. And we kind of started thinking about the game full time. Do you talk about that later, I think, right? Like how we started thinking about the game?
Yeah.
Because we had like a year where we were doing freelance work and also working on the game at the same time before we kind of quit and started doing the game full time.
Yeah. We hadn't been making games before Genesis Noir, so
right.
We were kind of a little bit of outsiders to the indie games world. Had to learn a lot on the way. So yeah, why don't we get into Genesis Noir? So Genesis Noir is set before, during, and after the Big Bang. To save a god, you must stop the expansion of the universe. So why don't we play the trailer now? So yep, that was our release trailer. We released the game in March 2021. And Genesis Noir was very inspired by Italo Calvino. We read this book in like 2013 or so. After hearing about it on a podcast, I picked it up right away and just fell in love with it. And I was like, Jeremy, you need to read this.
I really enjoyed it as well,
Yeah. So, yeah, we were just so inspired by the way that Calvino mixes humanist storytelling and these cosmic beings and settings. And he leaves so much to your imagination, but it's also very painterly with his imagery. And we thought, like, oh, maybe we could explore this idea a little bit more in a visual sense.
Specifically starting stories with scientific concepts and then kind of branching off from that, right?
Yeah. So Jeremy and I picked up a big pad of newsprint, started sketching, and we came up with these characters, No Man, Miss Mass, and Golden Boy. And together they form this classic love triangle where Golden Boy, this jilted lover, fires the Big Bang, which is both a gunshot, but also the creation of our universe. And we thought this was a really interesting idea and wondered, well, if the gunshot is the universe, where does that gunshot take place? It takes place in this cosmic city called the Constant. And we figured out, a plot structure and, well, what are the relationships of these characters? And this was all while we were still freelancing on various commercial projects in advertising and product design here in New York City. And we would take time off to make little experiments. So like, here's a test I did, kind of exploring ways that you could look into a building and have a story be told. And then eventually we took 2 weeks off together and opened up Unity and tried to build out some of these ideas and discover, all right, these very minimalistic environments, this very motion graphics transitions, how easy is it to build them? How much sense does it make in an interactive space that you can walk around in? And overall, we were mostly successful, though we did have some problems.
Yes.
I remember lots of issues with broken animations that we imported.
We would try to import like just a regular walk cycle and its legs would be rotated 90 degrees or something.
Yeah, so weird. So eventually we switched over to Unreal and we created a vertical slice demo, which is like a 15 or 30 minute experience of the game that has shows you like the full range of features, like walking around an environment, this interaction, the intro to the game. And we got a lot of positive feedback from people. And we teamed up with the really incredibly talented musicians, Skillbard, who are a team of composers and sound designers in London. And they like made the game amazing.
Yeah.
There was like a point where I was so worried that it was not going to be fun at all when we didn't have audio. But as soon as we put Skillbard's music in, I was like, oh, this is actually going to work. And by the time we finished the game, the credits had just ballooned. What started off as me and Jeremy and us bringing in some of our freelance pals here and there, quickly became this like really incredibly large project where we had a whole orchestra, we had localizers working on the game all around the world. It was like really beautiful to be a part of this project. And in Genesis Noir, you do a whole bunch of different things. Generally, they're all like simpler interactions that are tactile and poetic. So you do things like feeding a black hole, you track a stag through with hunter-gatherers in like a primeval forest, form a Japanese kintsugi, and eventually we released the game. It took us, 8 years from the initial conception.
Oh God, yeah.
And so it was a lot of work. Definitely delayed a bunch of times.
There were like 4 years of like full-time work.
Yeah, 4 years of full-time and then 3 years of exploration, pre-production. And the game did very well critically. We won several awards and got a bunch of nominations. The game was featured in 17 Game of the Year lists. And our players, they were a little more mixed. If you were in our target audience and like you really wanted to play some spacey,
weird stuff,
poetic, slow-paced detective game, then there's a good chance you really liked it and really appreciated what we were going for. Even though there were flaws and even though there were bugs, people were very patient with them and very, very generous. The game was a huge amount of work, and we really had to do so much research just to figure out the basics of game design, art direction, storytelling, the scientific premises that the game is structured around. So we read a ton of books, and along the way we discovered some new inspirations, and then also had some things that we really found incredibly beautiful that we already knew we wanted to put in the game. So Genesis Noir was inspired by everything from literature like Calvino and music like Sun Ra, motion graphics, which was kind of something we were familiar with, like the work of Buck, cinema like Alphaville, fine art like Blake, and graphic novels like Gloriana. And in this lecture, we're going to focus in on Calvino, Sun Ra, and Blake, and starting off with Calvino. So, yeah, this was like the immediate impulse for the whole concept. And
your idea was originally, I think you had read the story. It's like, what if we told a noir type story in the same kind of structure?
Yes. Yeah, I was just so blown away with how much Calvino is able to tell with these really abstract characters and settings. The Distance of the Moon, I remember, was like such a fun story. If you're not familiar with cosmic comics or The Distance of the Moon, I'll just quickly summarize it. Calvino begins the story with a short paragraph that tells you the theory of the moon's formation, that the moon was created after a celestial impact, and that it took many, many thousands of years for the moon to settle into its final distance and shape. And so he imagines what it would be like to be on Earth and witnessing the creation of the moon, and it moving further and further away. And he takes us into like a really delightfully silly territory with characters plopping a ladder out onto the moon and climbing up onto it. And this was just it engaged both like my curiosity about scientific theories, but also like
the humanist
storytelling of just longing and desire and loss. And when I was walking to work one day, I was walking across the Williamsburg Bridge from Manhattan into Brooklyn, and looking at the New York skyline and just reflecting on cosmic comics. And the thought occurred to me that, well, the Big Bang, that sounded like, an interesting story in a cosmic comic kind of way. I was wondering what Calvino might do with that. And I realized that the Big Bang also sounds just like a film noir, like The Big Sleep. And even the photography in astronomical photography and film noir, it feels very similar. There's all these harsh shadows, single light sources, very austere, high contrast imagery. So it seemed like a really natural combination, and perhaps it could be a way that we could pay homage to Calvino's work, but put in some of our own experiences, having lived in New York City, and put a genre spin on it. So I started sketching, and these were some of the first initial sketches that I put together. And I put these on my website and labeled them as like concepts for a project inspired by Calvino. And like people found them right away, which was like really interesting. Like a professor who was writing a book about Calvino found this image. And, we hadn't announced this big project or anything. She found it, she put it and asked to put it on the cover of her book. And someone asked for a tattoo. Like, I think there's so much appreciation for Italo Calvino's work, and anyone creating like visual imagery that's inspired by it is like just quickly found out and appreciated. So from Calvino, we really wanted to pull in this idea of creating a poetic juxtaposition between the prosaic and mundane and commonplace, like planting a seed and watching a plant grow, and the cosmic and extreme and the divine. So like in the game, we try to repeat interactions and use them in new ways. So for instance, in the game, you plant seeds and you create this Edenic garden. But later in the game, you repeat this planting interaction, but you're now planting black holes. And Jeremy made this incredible starfield effect. Another like example of this is we have a level where you advance time by spinning this young star, and the accretion disks around it all turn into planets, and eventually that star explodes into a supernova. And later in this chapter, you follow this stag, and eventually it dies, and you spin the sky and you watch it decay. So trying to create a juxtaposition between the death of a star and the death of a stag, and see how maybe they're related. We also ended up really ripping off this format where each short story begins with a scientific concept. At first, I really wanted to avoid this because it felt like it was too ripping him off too much. But we really found it necessary to just establish where you are in the whole history. And
because the game goes throughout all of time, basically. And the main interface where you pick which place you're going to is just in this giant like star field, and you don't really know where you're going when you start.
Yeah.
So having this kind of landing spot, I think, was really important.
Yeah, just to tell you where you are, what you're doing there, why the character cares about this time and place. So yeah, I think that was probably also a lesson that Calvino learned when he was writing his short stories, and we're really grateful that we were able to kind of pick that up from him. So yeah, we were also really inspired by Sun Ra.
Yeah, so Sun Ra is a jazz musician from the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. He kind of created this whole idea of Afrofuturism, which is like imagining if Black people were in space and they kind of had this whole shared ethos of existing with the cosmos. And he wrote music around these themes in a very kind of free and collectivist kind of fashion. He would live in a house full of these musicians, and they would rehearse at all hours of the day. And it kind of really felt like jazz really fits in with the noir kind of aesthetic, just because it was around the same time when those movies were getting popular. And so the most cosmic jazz is generally Sun Ra's, so it made sense to kind of pick him as one of the main musical inspirations. So it's just this kind of really weird, spacey kind of stuff. I was not expecting that to play. Sorry, I went to go here. But yeah, he was a keyboard player. He ran the Sun Ra Orchestra, which is still running today. He passed away in 1993, I believe. And yeah, we just really liked the whole kind of aesthetic. You can see a lot of the same kind of ray shapes and black and white kind of aesthetic that we have in our game, especially on our soundtrack album cover as well, which we have right here.
Yeah, we pay
yeah. So here's that shape right there, basically. That that same shape on the screen there. We basically copy it directly, sort of. Do we? Yep. Yeah, it's basically one for one. Just as kind of a little homage to his kind of visual aesthetic. He was a very visual guy. He had all these crazy costumes that his whole band performed in, and like just covered in sequins and glitter and stuff. He would like paint his keyboard weird colors and stuff. So we kind of really liked this idea of a very visual type of jazz music. And we wanted to tell a kind of story about jazz music within the game itself. We have these kind of 4 characters that embody the various aspects of humanity. One of them was the human's creative ability, their ability to create new art out of basically nothing. And I have a bit of a background as a jazz musician, playing drums all throughout school. And I really loved playing jazz music specifically because you had that improvisational kind of aspect to it. And we really wanted to figure out a way to get that free improvisation kind of feeling into our game. So the idea that we came up with was learning how to improvise, by starting with this kind of reverse Simon Says interaction where you would play a few notes and then the other character would kind of alter them and play them back in a more complicated fashion. And then it would evolve into being able to just kind of play with these square shapes that we were really inspired by album covers, right? You found all these, I think. Just like Blue Note album covers. They were always really geometric. And we came with this idea of, what is this? Oh yeah, hold on, I'm getting sidetracked here, sorry. We came up with this idea of building a city out of all these blocks, where each little part of a building was a note that you could play. And we kind of started this loose collaborative process, which was how we kind of built a lot of the interactions, where you might start writing a short story. We had one of our concept artists, Marcin, draw all these kind of styled comic book panels for starting the interaction. That kind of were this jazzy take on a city. And I had made this kind of prototype interaction of these bricks that you would paint through the sky, and they would fall down and build this abstract city. I hit upon this idea of what if each of the little bricks was a musical note, and it would allow you to play along with a song. And I think I have a clip of that here. Let's see. So at this point, you like have this collaborative moment with one of the other characters, where you're like, oh, I'm feeling confident in my improvising skills, which is kind of the feeling of when you first start learning. And one of the kind of problems that I was dealing with when I first started building this was trying to make it structured. So enforcing like a sense of tempo, enforcing like this really rigid kind of way of the computer responding to what your input was. And I realized the more and more I pared back what the interaction itself was, just to be the simplest thing, the more fun it was, the less restrictions you had. And that kind of felt like I imagine what Sun Ra was experiencing when he started. He did a lot more rigid, general big band stuff. And as he grew as an artist, he got looser and more free with it, where eventually, his shows were generally kind of structured, but there was like a 30-minute just like free improv piece in the middle of more structured stuff. So that's kind of what this felt like, where we kind of bookended the level with like the structured interaction of learning how to play jazz music and then allowing you to be just totally open with it. So I kind of felt like I was going through the same learning process that Sun Ra did when he realized that, the fun part is just making sound. And let's see what's next here. Right. No, I don't need that one. Yeah. So eventually you kind of zoom out and we get to this big city structure that you can build. And at this point, the computer starts taking bits of what you played before and playing them back at you at like in like a bass kind of sound, because the other character is a bass player, an upright jazz bass player. So you could make these large gestures and the computer would play them back. And this basically became kind of the main focal point of the interaction. And while I was building it, it felt like I was collaborating with the people who were going to play the game in the future. I wasn't making so much like a game. It felt like I was making more of a creative tool. And we got really good. This got a really strong reception. A lot of teachers messaged me asking if they could get like a standalone version of this for their students, because it allows you to make music that sounds in key, based on the chords of the song that Skillbird made, while allowing you to be totally free with the rhythm. So you can kind of, it'll always sound good, but you can make it sound weird if you want. And even on Xbox, or even with a gamepad, we added a bunch of extra Easter egg buttons that could like change the sound and allow you to get really dissonant and distorted with it. But yeah, that's how we were inspired by Sun Ra, I think, a fair amount there.
Yeah. And also want to talk about William Blake, who, if you aren't familiar, William Blake was a Romantic era poet, printmaker, artist. And these are some of his prints: Ancient Days and Loset, Door of Death. And I really love his artwork, and I was very inspired. And
did that ever go into the game?
Yeah, it's in the book. There's a book that you can find.
Oh.
It's probably most people won't find it. But
yeah, I've never seen that before.
we snuck in some references. And there's one scene that is very mandatory, and that's referencing Blake's Newton at the bottom of the ocean. So we put no men at the bottom of this primordial sea. And I have a clip of this level just to show you. This is like,
what's the whole thing?
So this level portrays abiogenesis, which is the process from which inorganic molecules became organic in the primordial oceans on Earth. And they formed basic structures like cell walls from lipid bilayers. And over time, they evolved through sexual reproduction to form life. And this exploration from the miniature, the micro to the macro, from inorganic to organic, was really inspired by Blake's work and the things that he explored. In particular, this selection from Auguries of Innocence, in which Blake writes, "To see a world in a grain of sand and heaven in a wildflower. Hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour." This juxtaposition between, once again, the prosaic and the familiar with the divine and the eternal and the grand, I think is so interesting, and it's something that we tried to capture in these scenes where our character is exploring the universe. And I was also incredibly inspired by Blake as just a craftsman. And I watched a couple documentaries on him and read a couple books. I'm by no means an expert. There's people that do doctorates on William Blake. But from what I know of printmaking in this era, it was so incredibly tedious. Blake would hand ink each plate for one of his prints so delicately. And he would often turn down commercial work to make his own artwork. And in his day, he was not as beloved and successful as he is today. This is the dingy shack that he made his artwork in. And I found him to be like the original indie artist, DIY before that was a thing. And just so incredibly diligent and persevering and in his work, which was provided like a real strong inspiration and role model, when making a game is like a lot of tedious work too. I feel like Jeremy and I spent so much time tracking down bugs, staring at our computers, and getting this game done. We made so many mistakes because it was our first game, and the last couple of months I remember working 80 or 90-hour weeks to get it ready. So yeah, from the quality of Blake's work, but also the way that he made it, like I found incredibly inspirational. And we just want to conclude this lecture by talking about game making and how it kind of interrelates with other art forms and heritage and culture as a whole. And overall, I think the biggest lesson that I personally learned over the course of development is that we had no idea what we were falling into. Like the game making process was so much more complex than what I expected. And the fact that it took us 7 years, we really grew and changed as people. And we realized that we weren't really truly the authors of the project. The project was more than the sum of each individual collaborator, contributing to the project. It was the product of so many mistakes and misunderstandings and happy accidents, that it's not creating a piece of art isn't just a rational exercise in craft. It's also opening yourself up to the process and letting that process dictate the outcome. And throughout the course of making the game, we collaborated with our past selves. We collaborated with other artists by learning from them and by referencing their work, and hopefully paying homage and giving people an introduction to those works. If maybe someone enjoyed this game, maybe they go and look at what inspired it. And I just want to talk on 3 aspects about game making that I think are particularly powerful ways to engage with culture, and which make game making part of this grand tradition, even though it is kind of a off-spit. You know, it's not exactly literature. It's not exactly music. It's not exactly printmaking. So like game making is mixed media. So it includes illustration, animation, poetry, nonfiction, environment, architecture, sculpture, music, story, interaction, just so much. And game making juxtaposes these different forms. And the lesson that comes from this process of combining all these different media is that you learn to manifest beauty in unexpected ways. It's often like Jeremy was saying with the music city interaction, we didn't have a clear vision of what that would become.
Right.
But by like slowly combining all these different pieces, it became something that none of us really perceived. And I think Calvino was an incredible source of inspiration on this way, and the way that he in his works, like If on Winter's Night a Traveler, he combines different genres and to create something that's more than the sum of its parts. I think game making is a great avenue for exploring that aspect of creativity. There's also collaboration. Obviously, making games is a lot of work and requires so many different skill sets. And Jeremy's made these graphics for showing how that brush
the
jazz interaction works. But I started seeing this as like a way to visualize the creative process, like where like an idea kind of moves through a space, and it's not a linear straight path. It flows and it moves around, and each person contributing to the project is offsetting this path a little bit and pulling it in different directions, and it becomes this very organic process. And when we start with a bunch of these just ideas that aren't connected, but we start pulling on them as a group, as a team, and we find that it becomes this like tight knot of concept and execution that we didn't anticipate. So I think game making really teaches you to improvise, just like Sun Ra, and become part of a process and not someone trying to dictate an outcome. And lastly, I think game making is just incredibly challenging. Like constructing all these things is such a complex experience. Like this is just one of the shaders in the game, this mess of spaghetti nodes and connections. And we had so many bugs that we had to debug. And anytime you poked a bit of the game, there's a good chance that you would break it. And we just had to run through and playtest stuff so much that by the time we were releasing the game, everything just felt like it was on fire and constantly broken. But by the conclusion of the project, we had kind of accepted that and learned to kind of occupy that really challenging territory. And games require dedication to your craft, and they foster perseverance. And this dedication really develops your appreciation for beauty in art and understanding the craft that exists all around us in the built world, but also the beauty of nature. So yeah, that's just a quick run through with some of the artists that we were really a fan of. And if there are any questions, we'd love to answer.
Yeah, and thanks for your time.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to remove the presentation. So thank you for your lecture. It was very interesting. And we have one question from, I'm going to put it on screen so you can see it.
Sure.
This one. What about your game design inspiration? You said you have been studying a lot through the process of designing the game. What are the game designers that influenced you the most?
I think the main one was a guy named Vector Park, who did Flash interactive things back in the early 2000s. And they always had this really nice tactile quality without like they felt like fun toys that you were playing with as opposed to like a game you were trying to solve. And we were really kind of interested in that kind of fidelity of interaction, where there's a lot of detail, a lot of things you could roll your mouse over and have move in the scene. And we both kind of studied that kind of work back in college because we had gone to school to make like complicated Flash websites like that. And eventually Flash had died in 2011 or something. So it was nice to kind of bring that kind of flavor back. But that was our main inspiration, I think.
Yeah, the games of Anamita, like
Yeah,
Botanicula and
Amanita design,
Samaros, really taught us so much about storytelling,
Wordless
storytelling, yeah, and how to like create simple puzzles, to use your feedback. Those were hugely inspiring.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
There's also a hello guys from Lorena.
Hello.
And also another question from Francesco, like this one. You talked about inspiration from 3 different cultures. How can games connect cultures in these challenging times?
I think specifically, games are kind of a thing that is easy for people to love universally. So even if you are separated by a large amount of culture or space, then people can have shared interests in a specific game or types of games that kind of help realize that, we're more alike than different. I think it's a pretty powerful kind of thing.
Yeah, and making games is such a cross-cultural experience too. Our game, we had people from France, Cuba, the U.S., England, Hungary, Australia. So many people like all across the world helping us and working with us. And we learned so much through that collaboration.
Okay, let's see if there are other questions. Not for now, but maybe we can try to wait for 1 minute if there are any other questions.
Yeah.
So let's see if there are other questions. I'm switching to Italian again for a while, just to vorrei ricordarvi che appunto gli IVIPRO Days iniziano venerdì prossimo, il 27 ottobre, e come dicevo in apertura, se volete saperne di più sul programma dell'evento in presenza appunto al Trieste, durante il Trieste Science Fiction Festival, potete andare a questo link, e a questo link potete trovare anche il link Eventbrite per registrarsi gratuitamente all'evento e quindi accedere all'evento. E quindi ecco, usate quindi questo link, vi potrebbe essere molto utile qualora vogliate venire a Trieste per l'evento in presenza appunto la settimana prossima. Vediamo se nel frattempo c'è qualche altra domanda. Switching to English again. So no, I think that there are no questions. So I think we are there. So thank you very much. Maybe last 30 seconds for the last question. If someone want to ask something to Evan and Jeremy, let's see. I'm like a director tonight because people don't see me, but there's a trailer on screen, comments on the right. So that's why I'm looking all over the screen. Okay, there's another question. Do you plan to make other games?
Yeah,
we're working on one right now.
Yeah, hopefully we'll announce it soon.
Yeah, in a few months.
Yeah.
Okay. So you can tell us more now, I think.
Probably not.
You'll have to be patient.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
We can wait. Okay, so I think that's okay for tonight. Thank you.
Thanks so much for having us.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for. Another question. Last question.
Sure.
Okay, this one. One of the most debated elements of noir as a genre is also how it deals with gender roles and representation. How did you two handle gender dynamics by approaching noir as a genre?
I think we didn't really pay, like our game uses genre tropes as a foundation, so we don't have like a really like intricate human characters. We have more abstracted characters. So using those tropes and that foundation was like a really important, like
it's a good way to ground the player because
exactly.
We're so out there with the visuals, and eventually the story gets really strange as well. So I think it's important to have some of these tropes at the very beginning, but we do branch out. Like the one on the other characters is effectively genderless. I think
it's just every human being.
It's the spirit of all humanity in one. So yeah, we do kind of end up subverting it at the end.
Yeah. I think I think it's very valuable to use genre tropes and expectations and then go somewhere different with them.
Okay.
And that's what we try to do.
Last question for tonight from Mario. This one. How did you know when the game was completed and stopped from keeping on working on it?
Our publisher told us.
Well, just money.
Yeah.
Budget. These things
Yeah.
are such a passion project, and there's so many ideas that we had to sacrifice and compromise, along the way, that we could work on it, forever. So, it's I think a very practical decision. Of when is it time to put down the pencil?
Yeah. I think it happens often with passion projects. These things you have to stop sometimes. You have to stop, otherwise you are going to work on it for years and years and years. So maybe.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that it's okay for tonight, and thank you for for accepting our invitation tonight for this preview online of the IVIPRO Days 2033. So thank you, and I'm waiting for your next game, so please keep us posted for.
Keep your eyes open. Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah, we'll let you know.
Yeah.
Thank you again, and see you soon.
Yep, take care.
Thank you.
Bye bye.